Today, we look into John 21 to see Jesus having breakfast with his disciples following his resurrection. Experts tell us that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, that we shouldn't skip it, and we should eat something healthy to jumpstart our day. I normally have a breakfast of steel-cut oatmeal, sprinkled with cinnamon and topped with apples. I actually look forward to my oatmeal every day. Today we look at a story of Jesus having breakfast with his disciples. He is cooking some fish on an open fire for him and his disciples to enjoy together. And I've got to tell you, when I think of this scene, I get a little jealous. First, because I want some of those fish. The only time I remember having fish for breakfast was in my childhood. My family used to camp in the High Sierra Mountains in Central California. Our favorite camping spot was a secluded campsite next to McGee Creek. That's where I learned to fish, and I recall many pleasant days sitting on the bank of the creek with my brother catching trout. I fell into the creek a couple times too, but that's another story. My brother and I weren't the only ones fishing. Everyone in the family did, and so we ended up catching a lot of fish. And some mornings I'd wake up to fresh fish, breaded in cornmeal, being pan-fried by Dad on the camp stove. It was fish for breakfast, and I loved it. I couldn't get enough of those fish. So the story of a fish breakfast on the shore of Galilee reminds me of my childhood experiences that I hold dear. But more than the fish, I just imagine how great it would be to sit down with Jesus over breakfast. Can you just picture a casual breakfast with Jesus, a couple of fried fish, some hash browns, maybe a cup of coffee? We don't normally picture Jesus in that kind of a setting. He even cooked the fish, Chef Jesus. So Jesus had breakfast with his disciples on the shore of Galilee. He'd recently been resurrected, and so soon he would ascend into heaven. So every day the disciples saw Jesus was very precious. And it's safe to say that this is the most memorable breakfast they ever experienced. John 21, verse 1. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. So Jesus appeared to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. We remember that when the women went to the tomb with their spices to anoint Jesus' body, they found the tomb empty. And the angel told the women that Jesus had risen, that they were to go quickly and tell his disciples. They were also to tell them that Jesus would meet up with them in Galilee. And so the disciples are back in Galilee after being in Jerusalem for the Passover. It had been a crazy week in Jerusalem. First, they saw Jesus ride into Jerusalem on a donkey as people lined the road with palm branches and their coats, singing praises to him and declaring him the Messiah. This would put in the disciples' minds the expectation of a new kingdom. Next, they witnessed the betrayal of a trusted friend as Judas, one of the 12 disciples, completely betrayed Jesus, selling him out to the Jewish leaders. And Judas was so trusted by the others that he was the group's treasurer, so this betrayal had to have hit them hard. Then Jesus was arrested in the middle of the night and put through a rushed trial that resulted in him being sentenced to death. During the trial, Peter, the disciples' leader, denied even knowing Jesus. He let Jesus down at the point of greatest need. And next, there was the agonizing crucifixion of Jesus. And in the disciples' minds, when Jesus died, all hope died. But then there was the resurrection, as Jesus came back to life on the 3rd day. And this news was so wonderful, it was almost too good to believe. And finally, there were several appearances of the risen Lord. All these events occurred in the span of a week. And so now, with all this going on, the disciples were understandably confused and unsure of the future. So the disciples went fishing. And it was Peter's idea. Jesus had not yet appeared in Galilee as he had promised. Well, Peter had a family to support. He didn't want to sit around just doing nothing. And so he said to the others, I'm going out to fish. And the others liked the idea so much that they joined him. And I can just imagine the picture of these disciples sitting in a house talking about their crazy week. Jesus had not yet come to Galilee. They didn't quite know what to do till he arrived. So Thomas may have said, hey, Nathaniel, what do you want to do? And Nathaniel answers, I don't know. What do you want to do? And Thomas replies, I don't know. James, what do you want to do? And James says, I don't really know. What about you? And finally, Peter abruptly interrupts and says, I'm going out to fish. So out the disciples went. They all boarded Peter's boat and set out onto the lake in the night's darkness. Fishing was often good during the night while the fish were active and feeding closer to the surface. Plus, fishermen could fish during the night and then sell what they caught in the morning. Now, these were commercial fishermen, not weekenders. They weren't fishing with fishing poles or small nets. They'd be using a net meant to catch a lot of fish at one time. So they obviously went fishing with the intention of catching fish. They didn't set out with the idea of catching nothing. If that's what they thought would have happened, they wouldn't have gone. Fishing is a lot more rewarding and a lot more fun when you catch fish. I remember a trip my dad took with me about 38 years ago. We went to the High Sierras, the place where our family used to camp when I was a small boy. Now on this trip, we stayed at a trailer park at June Lake. Dad had the idea to go fishing one morning, and so we went out with our poles. We fished the entire day, hour after hour, fishing from the shore, but didn't even get a nibble. We saw some others further down the lake who were catching some fish, but we had no luck. And I was getting very bored and just wanted to quit. My dad was probably 30 yards away from me when he suddenly started shouting, I've got a bite, I've got a bite. And Dad was all full of excitement as he reeled in his catch. And when he pulled it out of the water, it was just a scrawny little fish. Certainly nothing to brag about. Any other day, we would have probably thrown it back, but Dad proudly held up his little fish as if it were a whopper. Well, the disciples caught nothing, not a single fish, not even a scrawny little one. When the day dawned, they were all probably tired, hungry, and pretty grouchy. We pick it up in verse 4. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, Friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. After Jesus' resurrection, sometimes he wasn't recognized. The two men on the road to Emmaus didn't know it was Jesus at first. There was evidently something different about Jesus' post-resurrection body. Some people who knew Jesus, knew what he looked like, saw his new resurrected body. He looked familiar, but they couldn't really place who it was. I've had that kind of experience many times, like seeing someone across a restaurant and thinking, I know who that is, but I just can't place him. Also, as Jesus appeared to the disciples of Galilee, he was on the shore a good distance from the boat. And with the sun coming up, the sunlight might have been in the disciples' eyes, making it difficult to identify Jesus on the shore. Plus, the morning haze from the lake might also conceal his identity. Jesus calls out and says, Friends, haven't you any fish? Jesus knew full well that they hadn't caught a thing. He knows they are tired. He knows that they feel defeated. He knows they're grumpy. But he also knows that things are going to change very quickly if they listen and obey his voice. So Jesus asks if they have caught any fish. Although he knows the answer, he wants them to admit it. The disciples yell back, "No!" I can imagine them all yelling back in unison in a curt, angry voice, "No!" Kind of a back off and leave us alone attitude. Jesus then tells them to try the nets on the other side of the boat. To trained professional fishermen, this must have sounded absurd. After all, they hadn't caught a single fish on the left side of the boat. Why would the right side of the boat make any difference? But Jesus wasn't suggesting, he was commanding. He didn't say, "Why don't you try casting to the other side?" Jesus said, "Throw your nets on the right side." It was a command, but it was a command with a promise. Throw your nets on the right side, and you will find some. So the disciples did what Jesus told them to do. And when they obeyed Jesus, the net was so full of fish, they can't drag it back into the boat. This is so like Jesus, not just barely providing what's necessary, but blessing beyond any realistic expectations. He did the same thing when he performed his first miracle at the wedding at Cana. He filled all the wine vats with top quality wine. The party had more wine than was needed, and the best quality that could be offered. He also did it when he fed the 5,000 on the mountainside. With just a meager beginning of 5 pieces of bread and 2 small fish, he fed 5,000 people until they were satisfied and had many baskets full of leftovers. Pick it up now in verse 7. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. With the miraculous catch, John recognized that, hey, this is Jesus on the shore. He and Peter had seen something like this before. When they first decided to follow Jesus, Jesus told Peter to put his boat out into deep water and fish. Well, Peter said, "We've been fishing all night and have caught nothing. But since you say so, I'll do it." When they tried again in the deep water, the net became so full of fish that the nets began to break. Peter, James, and John recognized that day that Jesus wasn't just any ordinary guy. He had performed a miracle. He had done something nobody else could do. There was nobody like Jesus. And now, John sees it happening all over again. It happened at the beginning of Jesus' ministry as he called these men to follow him. And it happened now again at the end of Jesus' ministry. And I don't think it was just a coincidence that Jesus bookended his ministry with these fish miracles. When he did it the first time, he said, "From now on, you will fish for people." And before Jesus ascends to heaven soon, he reminds them of their mission. He sends them out into the world to bring people to him, to fish for people. Well, Peter was so excited that he jumped into the water. Peter had been fishing in his undergarment. It's probably the short tunic that a Greek workman would wear. He wrapped his outer garment around him, which was probably a fisherman's coat that Peter wore when he went fishing at night. And he wrapped it around him, perhaps tying it like you would tie a sweatshirt around your waist when you go to Disneyland. And then he jumped in the water. The boat was about 100 yards from shore, so obviously they're in deep enough water that Peter needs to swim. So he swims the length of a football field as fast as he can. There was a sense of urgency with Peter. While Peter is swimming to shore, the disciples left in the boat are following him to shore with a net full of fish. On shore, Jesus was there with a campfire going and with some fish and bread cooking. And Peter got to shore first. Now, don't you wonder what Peter thought when he saw Jesus standing by the charcoal fire? The last time we see Peter by a fire, he's warming himself in the high priest's courtyard, denying any knowledge or association with Jesus. And it was the lowest point in his life. So now Jesus has this fire going. And maybe it was there for more reasons than just to warm hands and cook fish. Perhaps it was meant to impress on Peter the seriousness of his denial at the earlier fire. But Jesus was not there to discourage Peter. He was there to forgive Peter. So as the campfire reminded Peter of his great sin, Jesus was also there to remind Peter of his great love and forgiveness. Pick it up in verse 10. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was so full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. So Peter dragged the net ashore. Now Peter, obviously a very strong guy. He doesn't need a daily trip to the gym to stay in shape. His work is physically challenging. So we see him dragging this heavy net full of fish ashore. 153 fish plus a net would probably weigh as much as 300 pounds with that net being wet, maybe even more. The net contained 153 large fish. Now, some Bible scholars have thought hard about the significance of the number 153. What does that number 153 represent? Well, sometimes a number is just a number. These are fishermen. Of course they're going to count their fish. First, because it's such a large catch. They were curious as to know just exactly how many were in that net. It's one thing to brag to your friends, "Yeah, I caught about 100 fish," based upon some kind of a visual estimate. But it's another thing to say, "No, really, I caught 153 fish. I counted them myself." Second, it would be the practice of fishermen to fish at night and then count the fish so they could divide the fish among the fishermen and sell it in the market in the morning. And these were not 153 puny little fish. The Bible makes a point of saying these were large fish. They were blessed both with quality and quantity. Obviously, the disciples understood this to be a miracle. They catch nothing all night, and simply by obeying Jesus, they catch 153 big, beautiful fish. And to top it off, their net didn't even tear with the heavy load of fish. They evidently figured that they would be doing some net repairing after this excursion, but the net was fine. And Jesus shared a meal with his disciples. First, he asked for some of their fish. He already had some on the grill, but he added some from their catch as well. I like that he made them feel included and allowed them to contribute to what he was doing. And really, in the Lord's work, we all have something to contribute, a part to play. All Christians are members of the body of Christ. Well, then, after cooking the fish, he invited them to have some breakfast. So the disciples sat on the shore and enjoyed the simple pleasure of having a barbecued fish breakfast. And as they shared a meal, they shared fellowship. And as much as they enjoyed a warm breakfast after a cold, difficult night at sea, they enjoyed far more the fellowship they had with Christ. What are some lessons for today? First is that obedience leads to blessing. When Jesus told the disciples to cast their nets on the other side of the boat, they could easily have turned him down. They could have thought to themselves, "Who is this guy? What made him an expert on fishing? We're the experts." That idea is just stupid. It doesn't make any sense that all the fish would be on one side of the boat, not the other. Or we're too tired to care. We've been fishing all night and caught nothing. But the disciples obeyed Christ and were blessed in a very unexpected way. And when we trust Jesus and obey his word, we'll experience his blessing in our lives. The second lesson is this, that fellowship with Jesus is the greatest blessing of all. The amazing catch of fish was awesome. The disciples were astounded and recognized what a miracle it was. But once they realized this was Jesus on the shore, they headed toward him as quickly as they possibly could. Nobody on the boat said, well, let's just stay here a while. The fish are just now beginning to bite. We can catch a lot more. The fish were great. The catch was amazing. But fellowship with Jesus was far more valuable. And they couldn't wait to get back onto the shore and spend time with him. When our life's priorities are in order, our relationship with Jesus is the greatest blessing of all. No matter how else he blesses us and how great the blessing may be, its value can never exceed our relationship with Christ.